She married a poor circus performer, unaware he was the millionaire who owned the entire show. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Her name was Emma, and she was a young woman who always tried to carry dignity on her shoulders, even when the weight of life pressed hard against her. She taught art classes at a small community center in a worn-down neighborhood. She lived in a modest apartment, the kind where the walls seemed too thin and the heating system coughed in the middle of the night. Yet Emma never complained. Her greatest treasure was a sketchbook she carried everywhere. Inside, she poured her heart out in pencil lines and watercolor, filling page after page with small glimpses of beauty she found in a world that often overlooked her. But recently, life had cornered her. Bills stacked up on her kitchen counter. The community center cut her hours. Even the landlord hinted that she might not last another month if the rent was not paid. Emma's heart remained steady, but her hands sometimes shook when she thought of the uncertainty waiting tomorrow. It was on one of those gray evenings, walking home through the city streets after finishing an art class with children, that she saw him. A circus performer, dressed in a threadbare costume, balancing on a narrow rope strung between two lampposts. His act looked almost out of place in the cold drizzle. Most passers-by hurried past, uninterested. But Emma slowed down, curious. The man was tall, lean, with sharp eyes that glimmered even through the rain. He stumbled slightly, caught himself, then landed on the pavement with a flourish, as if he had planned it all along. Only a few coins clinked into the old tin cup at his feet. He bowed with exaggerated theatrical flair. But Emma saw something different in the way he carried himself. For a split second, his posture, his calm control, and the quiet confidence in his movements did not belong to a poor man struggling to survive. It belonged to someone who had once stood on a much larger stage. She hesitated, then dropped a folded dollar into his tin cup. Their eyes met. His were intense, unreadable, almost studying her, rather than thanking her. "Thank you," he said quietly, with a voice that sounded deeper than she expected. Emma gave a small smile and started to walk away, but he called out, "Wait." She turned, unsure why her chest tightened. You look like someone who does not judge by appearances," he said, his voice carrying a strange weight. "I need help. Not with money, with something else." Emma blinked, half cautious, half intrigued. "What kind of help?" The man looked around as if measuring the night air, then stepped closer. His clothes smelled faintly of sawdust and rain. He said, "I need a wife. Not in the way you think. A contract marriage. 1 year. Nothing more. You get stability. I get what I need to keep my place in this city." Emma almost laughed. It sounded absurd. She wanted to say no immediately, but the seriousness in his eyes froze her words. "You do not even know me," she said, her voice defensive. He nodded. "That is the point. You do not know me, and you will not want me for anything except the agreement we make. I can promise you respect. I can promise you no tricks. And when the year ends, you will be free." Emma's mind spun. A poor circus performer was asking her to marry him, a stranger. Her life was already hanging by threads. Could she risk tying herself to someone like him? And yet, as absurd as it sounded, something in her heart whispered that this man was not what he seemed, that this proposal, as reckless as it sounded, might change the course of her life forever. She stared down at her sketchbook, clutched tight in her hands. Then she looked back at him, the man with rain in his hair and secrets in his eyes. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized her story was about to take a turn she could never have imagined. Emma did not say yes right away. That night, she lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how her life had twisted into this strange corner. The circus performer's words kept echoing in her mind. A contract marriage, 1 year, stability, respect, freedom afterward. It sounded reckless, but what choices did she really have? By the end of the week, the community center had cut even more of her teaching hours. The bills were piling higher, and the eviction notice was not far away. When she met him again, It was not on the street, but in a small diner near the edge of the city. He was no longer in costume. He wore an old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair tied back loosely. He looked less like a performer, more like a working man who had known hardship. They sat across from each other in a booth with peeling leather seats. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. "My name is Adrian," he said simply. "If we are going to do this, you should at least know that much." Emma hesitated, clutching her sketchbook in her lap. "Emma," she replied quietly. The contract itself was nothing fancy. Just words written out plainly, promising a year of shared living, no romantic expectations, no interference in each other's personal matters. He slid the paper across the table, along with a cheap silver-colored ring that looked like it had come from a bargain shop. Emma stared at it. Her heart told her to run, but her circumstances whispered otherwise. At last, with a shaky breath, she signed her name. The very next week, she found herself sharing space with Adrian in a cramped apartment above an old warehouse near the circus grounds. Life with him was anything but easy. His mornings began before sunrise, training and hauling equipment with other performers. He came home late, smelling of sawdust and sweat. The refrigerator was almost always half empty. The water heater coughed before giving out lukewarm showers. Emma, used to quiet evenings sketching in solitude, suddenly had to deal with a man who left boots by the door, tools scattered on the counter, and sometimes hummed old circus tunes under his breath. She found it irritating, and yet oddly human. There were clashes, of course. One morning, she discovered he had used one of her coffee mugs to store loose bolts and screws. She snapped at him, her frustration spilling out. "This is not how people live, Adrian. You cannot just turn everything into part of your circus." He looked at her with calm eyes, then shrugged. "It is not the circus, Emma. It is survival." Her anger faded into silence. She knew he was right, and yet she could not help feeling trapped in someone else's chaos. And yet, for every clash, there were moments that unsettled her in a different way. When her hands were full with groceries, he wordlessly took the bags from her, carrying them up the narrow stairs without complaint. When she came down with a fever one night, he placed a damp cloth on her forehead and sat by her bed until she fell asleep. He never mentioned it the next day, as if kindness was something ordinary, not worth discussing. Emma found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking. The way he moved with a quiet strength, the way his eyes softened when he saw children pointing at the circus wagons, the way he seemed older than his years but still carried a hidden fire. He was supposed to be just her husband on paper, yet the reality of living side by side blurred that line in ways she had not prepared for. One rainy evening, Adrian returned home soaked, carrying his worn coat over his shoulder. Without a word, he draped it over Emma as she sat sketching near the window, shielding her from the cold draft. She looked up, startled. The coat smelled faintly of rain and smoke. "Why would you do that?" she asked softly. He just smiled, a rare, almost shy smile, and said, "Because you looked cold." Emma pressed her sketchbook against her chest, her heart unsteady. She told herself it was nothing, just a gesture, just survival again. But deep inside, she wondered if the walls of their contract were already beginning to crack. The weeks passed, and Emma began to realize that a marriage made of paper could feel alarmingly real when lived day by day. What had started as a cold arrangement slowly filled with ordinary routines that carried unexpected warmth. Every Saturday morning, she insisted on going to the farmer's market to buy vegetables, and Adrian, though often grumbling, carried the heavy bags without question. They moved like an odd pair, the quiet art teacher and the rough circus performer, bickering over the ripeness of tomatoes while strangers smiled at them, as if they were any other married couple. One afternoon, Emma brought her students from the community center to see the circus practice. The children squealed with delight at the colors, the animals, the clowns rehearsing their skits. Adrian, still dressed in his ragged training clothes, surprised everyone by climbing a rope and performing flips with an ease that drew gasps from the children. Emma had never seen him in full motion before. His body moved like a story written in the air, every line precise, every landing confident. For a moment, she forgot he was supposed to be the struggling man she had pitied on the street. For a moment, she saw him as something greater. Later that evening, one of her students tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Your husband is amazing," the little boy whispered. eyes wide with wonder. Emma's heart stumbled. Husband. The word was supposed to be pretend, but hearing it from a child made it feel strangely solid. She forced a smile and nodded, but inside her chest, something tightened. The small moments piled up. Emma found herself laughing at Adrian's dry humor, something she had not expected from him. When her sink clogged, he fixed it with the same focus he used on his circus equipment. When she tripped on the apartment stairs, he caught her before she fell, his hands steady around her arms. "Careful, Emma," he murmured, and she felt a warmth travel up her spine. One rainy night, the two of them found themselves without electricity. A storm had knocked out the power across the block. Emma lit candles, their soft glow bouncing against the cracked apartment walls. She sketched quietly at the table while Adrian leaned against the window, watching the storm. For a long time, silence filled the room, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around them like a blanket. Then, without a word, Adrian pulled his old coat from the chair and walked over. He placed it gently over Emma's shoulders again, shielding her from the draft that crept in under the window. Emma froze, her pencil hovering above the paper. "You keep doing that," she said softly, turning her head to look at him. "Doing what?" he asked, his voice calm. "Acting like this is more than it is," she whispered, her words almost lost beneath the rain outside. Adrian's expression shifted, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. "Maybe it is," he said quietly. Emma's breath caught, and she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her sketchbook. Her heart thumped in a way she could not explain. This was not supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a simple arrangement, a line drawn clearly in ink and signatures. But reality was smudging those lines with every passing day. And still, she held on to her rules, reminding herself again and again that this was only temporary. That once the year was over, they would walk separate paths. But when Adrian smiled at her in that dim candlelight, as if she were more than a contract, Emma could not ignore the fear rising inside her. The fear that she was beginning to hope for something real. Emma told herself again and again that she could not afford to fall into illusions. Adrian was kind, yes. But he was also a mystery. He never spoke much about his past. Whenever she asked, he would brush it aside with a vague answer, redirecting the conversation as if his history were a door locked tight. One evening, as she returned home from the community center, she walked in to find Adrian sitting at the kitchen table. He had a small metal key in his hand, rolling it between his fingers as though deep in thought. The moment he saw her, he quickly tucked it into his pocket. "What was that?" she asked, setting down her sketchbook. "Nothing important," he replied too quickly. Emma frowned. The key did not look ordinary. It gleamed with polished edges, not like the cheap apartment keys they both carried. For a moment, she had the strange sense that Adrian was not who he claimed to be. That behind his patched shirts and circus gear was someone else entirely. Over the next days, little clues began to trouble her. She noticed how he spoke with performers and workers around the circus. Even though he wore the same ragged clothes as they did, they listened to him with a respect that seemed unusual. Once, she overheard a younger acrobat whisper to another, "He is different. He knows more than any of us." They fell silent when they realized Emma was nearby. Then there was his posture, his mannerisms. When they attended a neighborhood gathering, Adrian stood as though he were used to commanding a room. His words were simple, but his tone carried authority. Emma watched how people reacted to him, almost unconsciously deferring, and it unsettled her. Late one night, while cleaning the living room, Emma found a slip of paper tucked inside one of Adrian's old coats. It was a receipt from a high-end tailor across town, dated only a few months earlier. The price was astronomical, far beyond what a struggling circus performer could ever afford. She stared at it, confused, then slipped it back where she had found it. She wanted to confront him, but fear stopped her. What if he had secrets too heavy for her to carry? What if everything she thought she knew about him was a lie? The more she observed, the more her mind raced. Sometimes she caught him looking at her sketchbook with quiet intensity, as though the drawings revealed something about her that words could not. Once, she woke in the middle of the night and found him sitting by the window, staring out at the distant glow of the circus tents. His face in the moonlight looked tired, but not of physical labor, tired of hiding. Emma's heart wrestled with conflicting truths. She knew Adrian as the man who carried her groceries, fixed her sink, and draped his coat around her shoulders. Yet she could not ignore the hints that suggested he was far more than a poor performer scraping by. And still, she kept silent. She convinced herself it was not her place to question. Their arrangement was temporary. They were bound by signatures, not by trust. If he carried secrets, they were his to protect. But in the quiet corners of her mind, Emma wondered if those secrets were the very reason he had chosen her. Someone ordinary, someone who would not dig too deeply, someone who would not expect the truth. The thought left her unsettled. Because even though she told herself she did not need to know who Adrian really was, her heart whispered something else entirely. Her heart whispered that she wanted to know everything. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon when Emma agreed to bring Adrian to a family gathering. It was her sister's engagement party, held at a suburban house filled with polished furniture and guests dressed in their finest. Emma had hesitated to ask him to come, but part of her wanted to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was not ashamed of the man she had married. Adrian arrived in his usual way, wearing a clean shirt but still marked by the simplicity of his lifestyle. He carried himself with quiet dignity, but to the eyes of Emma's relatives, he was nothing more than a poor circus performer. From the moment they stepped inside, Emma felt the weight of disapproval pressing against her. Whispered comments floated around the room. Faces turned, eyebrows raised. Her aunt pulled her aside almost immediately. "Emma," she said in a low voice, "this is the man you married? A circus worker? You deserve better than this. People will talk." Emma clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm. "He is kind," she replied firmly, "and that is worth more than what people think." But the true test came at the dinner table. Her father, a man who had always measured worth by bank accounts and social standing, stared at Adrian with thinly veiled disdain. After a long silence, he asked, "So tell me, young man, how much does balancing on ropes and juggling balls pay these days? Can you even provide for a wife?" The room fell silent. Emma felt her stomach twist. Adrian's expression did not change. He placed his fork down and answered evenly, "It pays enough for a man who works hard, sir." Laughter broke out from one of her cousins. Another relative whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Imagine, Emma married a clown." Oh, the words burned through her. But what hurt most was the way her father leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disappointment. "Emma, you have always had such potential, and this is the choice you made?" Emma's cheeks burned, her hands trembling under the table. She wanted to scream, to defend Adrian, but the humiliation pressed heavy on her chest. She glanced at Adrian, hoping he would not see the shame in her eyes. Adrian stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that silenced the whispers. "I do not want Emma to suffer because of me. If my presence brings her shame, then perhaps I should not stay." He looked at Emma for a long moment, his eyes holding something unspoken, something that cut deeper than words. Then he turned and walked out of the house, leaving the chatter behind him. Emma sat frozen, her heart pounding. Her relatives began murmuring, some smug, others pitying. She could barely hear them. All she could think of was Adrian's back as he walked away, carrying the burden of their contempt without flinching. She excused herself and fled to the bathroom, gripping the sink as tears blurred her reflection in the mirror. She hated them for judging him. She hated herself for not defending him louder. But most of all, she hated the contract that kept them both trapped in silence, unable to admit what they truly felt. That night, Emma returned to the empty apartment. His boots were by the door, but Adrian was gone. On the table, he had left a folded piece of paper with only a few words written in his careful hand. "I will not let you be hurt because of me." Emma pressed the note to her chest, her tears falling freely now. The contract had begun as protection, a shield against the world. But now it felt like chains, holding her back from speaking the truth that burned inside her. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the window, Adrian walked alone, choosing distance over watching the woman he loved suffer because of who he pretended to be. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Emma went to the community center, taught her classes, returned home, and found the apartment still half empty without Adrian's presence. His boots by the door remained untouched. His coat hung where he had left it. Every detail reminded her of the absence he had carved into her life. Then one evening, as Emma walked through the city streets, she noticed a commotion near the central square. Bright lights glowed against the night sky. A massive banner stretched across the grand entrance of a newly renovated circus arena. Crowds lined up, dressed in evening clothes, as reporters snapped photographs. Emma stopped in her tracks, her sketchbook clutched tightly in her hand. And then she saw him. Adrian stepped out of a sleek black car, wearing a tailored suit that fit him with flawless precision. His hair was neatly combed back, his shoulders broad, his stride confident. For a moment, Emma could not breathe. This was not the man who had left boots by her apartment door or draped an old coat over her shoulders. This was someone else entirely. Flashes from cameras lit the night as journalists called his name. "Adrian Blackwell, over here!" A statement about the opening show? Emma's mind reeled. Blackwell. The name echoed in her ears. She remembered hearing it before, whispered in the neighborhood. The mysterious millionaire who had bought the entire circus and rebuilt it into a world-class empire. Her heart pounded as she realized the truth. The poor performer she had married, the man who fixed her sink and carried her groceries, was the owner of the entire show. Emma stumbled closer through the crowd, her pulse racing. She watched Adrian step onto the red carpet laid across the entrance. His gaze swept across the people, the flashing cameras, the glitter of wealth that surrounded him. For a moment, their eyes met. His expression faltered ever so slightly, as if seeing her there cut through the mask he wore for the world. Reporters continued shouting questions. "Mr. Blackwell, how does it feel to reopen the circus after years of decline? What new vision do you have for the company?" Adrian answered smoothly, his voice steady, but Emma heard the weight beneath his words. "This show is not just about entertainment. It is about honoring the people who believe in dreams, even when the world looks down on them." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to step forward, to demand answers, to ask him why he had hidden the truth. But the crowd surged around her, sweeping her back, and the moment slipped away. That night, Emma sat by her window, the city lights glimmering in the distance. Her hands trembled as she opened her sketchbook. Inside, she drew the image burned into her memory. Adrian standing tall in a tailored suit. No longer the poor performer, but the man who held an empire in his hands. Her heart was a storm of anger and longing. He had lied. He had let her believe he was nothing more than a struggling circus worker. And yet, she could not forget the man who had sat by her bed when she was sick, who had carried her bags without complaint, who had covered her shoulders with his old coat. Now she knew the truth. The question was, could she forgive him for hiding it? Emma could not contain her emotions any longer. The very next day, she went to the circus grounds where the grand opening rehearsal was taking place. Workers hurried across the arena, technicians tested lights, and acrobats warmed up for the show. But Emma was not there to admire the spectacle. She was there for Adrian. She found him near the main tent, surrounded by managers and performers awaiting instructions. He wore another tailored suit, his presence commanding, his words sharp and confident. When Emma stepped into view, his voice faltered for the first time. The people around him noticed and quietly excused themselves, leaving the two of them alone. Emma's heart pounded as she faced him. "So it is true," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and disbelief. "You are not a poor performer at all. You are Adrian Blackwell, the owner of this entire empire." Adrian's eyes softened, though his posture remained steady. "Emma." "No," she cut him off, her hand gripping the sketchbook tight against her chest. "You lied to me. You let me live beside you, thinking you were struggling, thinking we were fighting the same battles. Do you know how it feels to discover that the man you married has been hiding behind a mask all along?" Adrian took a step closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted one thing. To know what it felt like to be loved for myself, not for my money, not for my name. When I met you, I saw someone who looked at me without judgment. That is why I asked for the contract. I was afraid if you knew who I truly was, you would never see me as just a man." Emma shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "You did not trust me with the truth. You thought so little of me that you believed I would only care about your wealth. Do you realize what that says about us? About me?" Adrian's hands clenched at his sides, his voice breaking for the first time. "It says I was a coward. It says I was afraid of losing the only real connection I have ever had." Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. Emma felt her chest tighten, torn between the memory of his kindness and the sting of his deception. She turned away, whispering, "I do not know if I can forgive you." Adrian's voice followed her, thick with emotion. "I will wait. For as long as it takes, I will wait. Because you are not just part of a contract, Emma. You are the reason I finally want to be a man worthy of love." Emma did not look back. She walked away, her footsteps echoing inside the grand tent, her heart caught between anger and longing, truth and betrayal. The night of the grand reopening arrived, and the circus grounds glowed brighter than the city skyline itself. Spotlights cut through the sky. Music thundered from inside the massive tent, and thousands of people filled the stands, waiting for a show that promised to revive a legend. Emma sat in the audience, her sketchbook resting on her lap. She had not planned to come, but something in her heart had drawn her here. A need to see Adrian, not as a secret, not as a stranger, but as the man he truly was. The lights dimmed, and the murmurs of the crowd hushed into silence. Then, Adrian stepped onto the center stage. No costume this time. No disguise. He wore a fitted suit, his voice steady as it rang out through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just the return of a circus. It is the return of dreams. Dreams that remind us to look past appearances, to see the value in every human being, no matter where they come from or what they wear." The audience erupted into applause. Emma's chest tightened as she listened. She knew those words were not for the crowd. They were for her. Adrian raised his hand, and the applause softened. His voice grew more personal, more vulnerable. "There is someone here tonight who taught me the greatest lesson of all. She showed me kindness when I had nothing. She saw me not as a name, not as a title, but as a man. To her, I owe everything." The spotlight shifted suddenly, sweeping over the audience until it found Emma. Gasps spread through the stands as heads turned in her direction. Emma froze, her cheeks burning. But she could not look away from Adrian. He lifted something in his hand. It was her sketchbook, the one she had thought lost weeks ago. He opened it to a page where he had carefully redrawn one of her sketches. The night he had draped his old coat over her shoulders. The drawing was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had shared. "Emma," Adrian said, his voice breaking slightly, "I may have built this circus, but you gave me the courage to be honest, to be real. You saw me when I was nothing, and that is the only reason I stand here as something today." The crowd fell silent, waiting. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her seat. She felt every wall inside her cracking, every doubt colliding with the memory of his quiet kindness. The spotlight lingered, the music swelled. And for the first time, Emma stood up, her heart racing, ready to choose not just for herself, but for the truth they had both been running from. Emma's legs felt unsteady as she stepped down the aisle, the eyes of thousands following her every movement. The spotlight guided her to the center of the stage, where Adrian stood waiting, his hand still holding her sketchbook like it was the most precious treasure he owned. When she reached him, the world seemed to blur away. The crowd, the lights, the music, all of it faded, until only the two of them remained. Adrian's eyes locked on hers, raw with sincerity. "I did not tell you the truth," he said, his voice steady, though it carried pain. "Because I was afraid. I thought if you knew who I was, you would never see the man inside. But you saw me anyway, Emma. You saw me when no one else did. And I do not want to hide anymore. Not from you." Emma's throat tightened. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time she did not fight them. She pressed her hand over the sketchbook in his grasp and whispered, "I was angry because I thought you did not trust me. But the truth is, I never stopped seeing you. Not the circus owner, not the millionaire. Just you." The audience held its breath, waiting for her next words. Emma took a deep breath and said clearly, "I do not want a contract anymore. I do not want pretense. If we are together, it must be real." Adrian's expression broke into a smile, tender and relieved. He slipped the old, simple ring back onto her finger, the same one he had given her in that diner months ago. "Then let it be real," he said softly. The audience erupted into cheers, clapping and stomping their feet. The music soared, filling the tent with triumph. But for Emma and Adrian, the noise was only background to the truth that finally bound them. He pulled her close, and she did not resist. Their kiss was not just for show, not just for a crowd. It was the seal of a love that had grown through hardship, misunderstanding, and revelation. When they finally broke apart, Adrian raised their joined hands high. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice ringing with pride, "this is my wife, the woman who turned a contract into love, and who reminded me that true worth is measured not by wealth, but by the heart." The crowd roared, rising to their feet in a thunder of applause. Emma leaned into him, her heart steady now, certain. And as the lights blazed and the music swelled, she realized the truth she had been running from all along. She had not just married a poor circus performer or a hidden millionaire. She had married the man who had shown her what love meant when stripped of status and disguise. Their story had begun as a bargain, but it ended as a promise of love, of honesty, and of a life shared not by contract, but by choice.